the bunkering environment is changing and how we adapt to it. Just a quick word about Inatech. We're a marine fuel systems provider, and we do buying and selling platforms for some of the largest companies. On both sides of the manifold, we have in our customers some shipping lines as well as some suppliers. And that gives us an interesting perspective on bunkering, which I hope to share with you today. Quick word about me. I'm Alok Sharma, your presenter today, and I look after the marine division within Inatech. I'm a master mariner by profession, and I've held senior commercial and product management roles in marine logistics and express segments. During my career, I've been responsible for planning and purchasing of fuel for some of the largest shipping and logistics companies like CSAV, Royal Mail, etc. But before we start, let's just quickly understand the mechanics, because we like to make, and those of you who've attended webinars, Inatech webinars before will know that we like to make this as interactive as possible. So firstly, you should have a control panel on your screen. We will be polling hot topics during the webinar, so please do click your response. It makes it really interesting for the participants to see what the audience is thinking. You'll have approximately 10 to 15 seconds to respond, and I will share results with you as we go along on the hot topics. So let's just take a moment to practice. We are polling a question now, which you should see on your screens, which is, I can see and hear this webinar, and you've got the choices over there. So if you ping your response in, and we'll close it now. So, and if we just share the results, then you can see. Well, okay, we'll just move on now. But you can now see that 100% of the people can hear the webinar, which is a good thing. Good. So let's crack on then. A quick agenda that we've got over there. We've got a lot of material, and I hope relevant material that we want to cover. Firstly, a quick context. Why are we here? Secondly, all respectable, in my opinion, all respectable comments on oil should start with fundamentals, because it's a fundamental driven business. So let's look at what's happening in the fuel oil sort of demand and supply over the next 2 to 5 years. We'll then go to the impact of the regulatory environment on three items. The first one is quality, really looking at compliance, sulfur. The second one is claims, looking at how it's affecting the quantity and quality claims. The third one, of course, is prices. Of course, I'm gonna give a health warning right up front. As Neil Bohr once said, prediction is hard, especially it's about the future. So with that in mind, we'll dive deep into prices, and finally we want to bring it home by saying, what is effective procurement? What are the components of a sound bunkering strategy? What could it look like? And then we'll have a quick look at how some of our customers have defined, measured, monitored, and improved their bunkering. So moving on. Now this is a slide, and before we go in, we want to poll a question as I talk about this slide. And the question that we're polling is that it says, you'll see it in a moment. The question is, I have the tools and processes in place to get the best deal and value possible for my bunkering needs. And you've got some options there. Please do ping in as required, and I will as I talk through this slide. So this is actually a slide which is from the Central Institute of Procurement, which is the CIPS, and it looks at how procurement in general is how procurement in general is looked at. So across the vertical axis there, you've got risk going from left to right. And sorry, just give us a moment. I think we have a technical gremlin which is being sorted by my able colleague. So what we're going to do is, on the left-hand side, you've got risk on the vertical axis. Yeah, there you should see my mouse. And on the bottom there, you've got cost. So any procurement that is low cost and low risk, the focus should be to minimize effort. And these are, in shipping terms, these could be provision purchases, right? Simple things, cheap things, just automate them. As we go up over there, we are looking at high-risk items that are low cost. And I could say that trading is an example. You know, it doesn't cost a lot to trade, but the risk is fairly high. And the focus there has to be reducing risk. If we come across here, this quadrant, bottom right, which is high profit and low cost, I could say that this is, high cost, low risk. This could be your spares, so the large spares that you buy for the vessels, fairly straightforward features, fairly straightforward description, and the effort should be on profit maximization. And you probably know where I'm going with this. On the top right-hand side, all the purchases which are high risk and high cost should be looked at purchases which can deliver a competitive advantage. And I put bunkers in this quadrant. Allow me to explain why. Because bunkers has traditionally been a support function, something that the vessel had to do to complete a commercial voyage, but all that changed. And we don't need to go over the history. You know, freight rates have gone south, bunker prices have gone north, but bunker prices have gone north for everyone, for all shipping lines. So that's where we think that the competitive advantage lies. Because if the unit cost of carry is high for everyone, then by comparatively bringing down our bunker cost, we can allow our commercial colleagues to win more cargo. And that's really key. So we'll just share the results with you of the question that I asked, and these make for slightly interesting viewing. So yeah, so about majority of the audience still think that there is room for improvement, and that's as expected. And you know, of course, as we go onwards, we will dive deeper into this. But this is the whole point of putting a strategy in place, that there's always scope for improvement. And so moving on, what we will see is talking about the fundamentals, and these are slides from JBC, their analysis. Let me just explain this. This is the fuel oil global demand and supply in millions of barrels per day. And focus where I've put the circle, the elliptical circle, which is that fuel oil, there is a shortage of fuel oil, really. And that's predominantly, and predominantly it's caused, we'll get into the detail of it a bit later, but it's a case of really Russian oil, which is the light blue graph over here, light blue bars, sort of supporting Chinese demand. So Russia has surplus and China has a need. What is also interesting is Middle East, which is an oil-producing region and should have a surplus, has actually a deficit of fuel oil. And that's not because there is any shortage of oil, it's just because there is a switch to distillates, because it makes more money, to put it simply. So, and we can probably spend a whole webinar on oil fundamentals, but I'll move on. And there's a whole bunch of factors that we can talk about here. How in Europe the refining capacity is going down, at least in the short term, how North America is going up and all that stuff. But the point, the key takeaway here is that there is a fuel oil shortage that's coming in the next 2 to 5 years. As we move on, so these, when we look at the core sort of users of fuel oil, we see that there are three. There is marine, so bunkers, which you see in orange. There is power, which you see in light blue, and there is industry, which you see in dark blue. And for the latter two, so for power and for industry, fuel oil demand is going down. And for bunkers, it's growing at roughly about 3% per annum. Depends on what analysis you look at. So overall, there is a shift towards distillates and gas. And an interesting statistic, an interesting data point here is about 11% of the barrel, of the crude oil barrel, it gets converted into, or gets cracked into fuel oil right now. And in 10 years, according to BP, it's going to be about 4%. So 4% of the barrel will become fuel oil. The rest will be, we'll have things like petroleum coke and other things coming on. But if you look at the prices, a barrel of fuel oil costs about 80 to 90% of a barrel of crude oil. And that's an interesting data point as well. And we can spend a lot of time talking about why that is. But just wanted to sort of position the fundamentals over here. So let's move on. Bringing it closer to home, now that we've seen some of the fundamentals, I'm going to touch very quickly on the emission control regulations. Everyone knows what they are, I hope by now. So we will focus more time on the impact of those regulations on quality, claims, and prices. But let's just refresh our memory on the actual regulations. So that's a timeline across the middle over there. I'd like you to focus on the three numbers over there, the three steps that are remaining. January next year, so in about 8 months' time, we have the 0.1% sulfur regulations coming in place for ECAs. Then there is the 2020 switch, or 2025, depending on what IMO does, the global cap of 0.5%. And that's the reason this is key. And there are a whole bunch of other regulations. There's NOx, there's nitrogen oxide, sulfur oxide, particulate matter, all that stuff. But the reason that these, I want to highlight on the sulfur regulations is because they're causing a shift in demand and supply. So in other words, well, certainly demand. We'll talk about supply a bit later. So that's, and that changes the sort of paradigm. And those of us that have been sort of buying and selling fuel for some time, and remember the late 90s, when fuel oil was $100 a ton, for us, probably this shift to a distillate is as seismic as when ships moved from sail to steam, or from steam to coal, or sorry, from steam to oil. So it's and that's why it's the effect of these regulations that one has to worry about. So let's move on. So those were the regulatory knowns. These are the regulatory unknowns. We don't know the timetable for NOx and SOx. Before I read through, we're going to poll another question at this time to see what the audience is thinking. And our question is that the regulatory unknowns are affecting the marine bunkers in the following way. And the choices you've got is prices going up, price volatility increasing, tight availability, or quality of bunkers. So please do ping your answers in as I talk through this slide. So some of the other unknowns that we have is, the new ECAs, and I've got Japan, Hong Kong, Turkey, Singapore, New Zealand. All of these administrations are talking about ECAs. Import regulations, particularly in US, we don't know what they might be, but we do know that the environmental agency in the US has shown most teeth, and we look at those. The real enforcement regimes in US, so we'll talk about FONARs, which are, we look at the acronym, but it's basically fuel non-availability notice given to ships. Regulations for LNG, still very, very nascent, if that, and CO2. This is going to come as well, the CO2 regulations. Even if shipping only contributes 4% to the actual carbon emissions of across the board, it is under scrutiny from the regulators, and they've been very open about it. So let's just share the polls. So the majority of the audience is thinking that price is going to get affected, and within that, price volatility. And I agree. I completely agree with this, and we will look at some evidence of this going forward. But it's interesting, because that's usually what happens whenever there's uncertainty in the market, and the regulatory unknowns are causing a whole bunch of uncertainties because they're blocking refinery investments. Okay, so now, but we will come to prices towards the end, I'll show you. So let's look at the effect of emission control regulations on variable fuel quantity. So I hope everyone is aware of 2005, 2010, and 2012 regulations, ISO 8217. This is a worldwide study. It is, admittedly, it's stopped at 2012, but still, at that time, December 2012, 76% of the fuel available was 2005, and roughly about 20% was 2010. The issue is that the key issue here is, and we don't even want to talk about 2012, because, you just can't find 2012 fuel. And, recently there's been a lot of press about the industry as a whole being somewhat relaxed to adopt the latest regulations, because the latest regulations are actually forcing the quality of the fuel to become better. Whether one looks at cat fines or across the board water content, other things, the regulations are actually geared towards improving, because that's how a regulator controls the market. But if there isn't an uptake by the participants, and any sort of analysis you read says, the buyers think it's the suppliers think it's the storage companies are blaming the oil majors. So that's why I say it's the industry as a whole, which has been slow to adopt the regulations. And all this while, our ships have been slow steaming. So, as somebody from a marine background, I asked myself, if the engines were, for example, let's take cat fines. If the engine manufacturer says you must use, 15 ppm, and you're using 80, 90 ppm for cat fines, aluminum and zinc, then, and that's been exacerbated by slow steaming, because oil is actually moving slower through the system. So it's causing more issues. Okay, so now we're just elaborating the point, and we're looking at the availability of 2005 and 2010 fuel across different regions. So you've got Singapore and ARA over there. Singapore is high 90s, and again, this was 2012 figures. Korea is over there, 96%, 2005. Going down the list, you can see a few key regions as being predominantly 2005. And as I said, the key issue is that it's depends on what your role is. If one is a ship owner, one is concerned that the ship's engine might suffer after the charterers has off-hired the ship. And if one is the charterer, then you might worry about breakdown and that stuff, which affects the ship. So that's just an interesting data point for us to consider. Now let's sort of look at sulfur. And this is a statistic from DNV. It looks at the average sulfur content within low sulfur fuel oil for 2013. So, and you've got, this is global. So, on average, you can say that the low sulfur fuel has 0.98% sulfur. And you might say, look, what's the problem? The regulation right now is 1%. We have fuel that is being supplied at 0.98%. What's the problem? The problem is compliance. The problem is that on an average parcel of low sulfur fuel oil, which is about 500, 600 tons, it takes about 5 tons of high sulfur fuel to contaminate that and push it over the edge. So in other words, what we're saying is if the average sulfur content is 0.98, it will take 5 tons of high sulfur 3.5 fuel oil to contaminate that parcel and push it over the edge. And if that ship gets inspected by Port State Control, they're going to hold the owners liable. And this is when we have 2015 regulations coming in next year, for the same parcel for 500 tons, it's going to take 0.5 tons of high sulfur. And don't forget, on ships, segregation is always prescribed and always followed, but ships don't flush pipelines. Yeah, you might, but then you will be increasing your distillate consumed. So, it takes a brave chief engineer to say, let me flush my pipelines with diesel oil so that I can keep it clean and I can receive this low sulfur product. So this is why it is important to see the detail of just how much sulfur is in that fuel, and not just look at a surveyor's report which says it gives you a green light because it sort of matches. Okay, let's move on. So this is again sticking with sulfur and sticking with compliance. These are figures till May of last year, and this looks at low sulfur off-spec fuel wherever the sulfur was found to be more than 1%. So off-spec low sulfur fuel, really. And in this naughty list, you find ERA region right on the top there. So Flushing, Antwerp, Rotterdam, Amsterdam. So one could say, and this is DNV data, so I'm merely quoting their data, which is to say that if one is taking low sulfur fuel in this region, there might be a 50% chance that is off spec, that fuel is off spec. And traditionally what happens is, of course, the DNV report or any survey's report will pick it up. One will put the supplier on notice, as is often the case, but believe me, I have spoken to ship owners who have been pulled up by the authorities, and suddenly you find that the suppliers, because of the R&R, the repeatability and reproducibility of the fuel, because it's only 95% certain, you find that the supplier has a very strong case that the fuel was on spec, whereas the administration is fining the ship. So sulfur is a compliance issue, and it's a big compliance issue. So over here, what we have is, these are just some recent headlines of last week, actually, where I pulled these from Monkaworld. where the Environmental Protection Agency has subpoenaed shipping companies. They've issued up to 70 phone hours, which is the non-availability reports already this year. So yeah, and the case, what I've highlighted there is, because obviously you can understand US regulations affect domestic companies the most. Yeah, US domestic companies the most. So there's a lot of pushback, even in the US, against more stringent regulations, and the response of EPA is it could prevent 12,000 to 31,000 premature deaths by 2030. I think there will be a brave industry body who will argue against that. But the key takeaway here is that sulfur is important, and that sulfur is going to be a compliance issue more and more. So one looks at the benefits of systemization. You know, again, if compliance is an issue, then record keeping becomes key. You know, one talks about real-time auto-reconciliation of lab reports, which ensures that, you know, your labs are not only reporting a green light and a red light, but also a more detailed analysis, a commentary, if you will. A supplier ranking, perhaps on the basis of the parameters, because, you know, it's a big range. It's a big range, and within that range, you can say that for every parameter, there are suppliers who have a slightly premium offering, and those that don't. And then one has to start understanding things like calorific value, true worth index, and the savings therein, because there are. I mean, the detail is the devil, or as someone said, the God is in the detail. So the key takeaway here is that, you know, I call it caveat emptor, which is buyer beware. It's a buyer beware market. It regrettably has been buyer beware, oil has, across across the value chain. So our advice is to look into the detail, and for buyers to try and understand what's going on with quality. So now let's move to claims, and I don't know how important claims would be to each of you, but certainly for us it is an increasingly important topic. In fact, it's our hottest discussion with our customers. And let's look deeper into this. So before we get in, we're polling a question right now, and the question is that over the past 12 months, my company's sulfur claims have gone up, gone down, or remained the same. So it's interesting for us to see, and as we close the poll, we will see what happens. Okay, so we'll show the results in a while, but this is what the data tells us. So the data tells us, and this is again DNV data. The blue line is cat fines, aluminium and silicon, and the red line is sulfur. And this is looking at the last switch. So if you remember back in 2012. 1st August, I think it was, when the 1% regulation came in, and DNV found a spike in cat fines, and that has a lot to do with you know, things like how the process of blending fuel oil. So that's what the data tells us. Let's just see what our audience thinks, and we're going to share the poll now. So the majority think that they've remained the same, and that's good. You know, there's another discussion that we can have. A third of us think that they've gone up. So yeah, there is a trend up, and this is what all the research into this subject has led us to believe. Okay, and we look at some more statistics going on. So now one often associates dollars with quantity. So in other words, if it's a short list, then it's a straight calculation, and you can straight away say, okay, I will claim this amount from the supplier. But there are certain quality characteristics which cost dollars as well. So low density, yeah, it's a straight calculation. High sediment content, straight calculation. High water content. And I'm going to try and prove the point here with a graph that I've pulled, and this is the past 12 months. Again, this information is from Bunker World. So this is telling us not the frequency, but the range. So in other words, in May, the range of water content in samples was between 1.8% to whatever this is, 0.1%, 0.2%. So of course, the survey reports in each of these cases would have caught it. So there would be a recourse that the buyer would have followed. But the regulation is 0.5%. Yeah. So the regulation says that if we've got 0.5% water content by volume, then that fuel is perfectly okay, and we'll get a green light from the surveyor, and we will use that fuel from the quality surveyor, and we will use that fuel on board. On an average lift, again, let's talk high sulfur. On an average lift of 5,000 tons, 0.5% is at today's prices approximately $15,000. So what I'm saying is the water content, even within regulations, the cost is about $15,000 per lift. Now again, this might be a small amount, but it builds up. So if it's $15,000 per transaction, you have maybe one ship does 10 bunkerings per year. That suddenly becomes $150,000. So in other words, you've paid $150,000 to have water, which is an interesting way to look at it. And I might be accused of being too pedantic and too detailed over here, but the fact of the matter is that every research that we read is telling us that the economic climate is going to start recovering, but really not really not help us. The freight rates are not really going up. So we have to, cost leadership is key over here. And in this, if we knew a way of saying, look, we want to know if the supplier on average gives us 0.2% or 0.5%, that could be a difference of $300,000 over 1 year per vessel. So it becomes important to look into detail. So let's move on. Again, I'm not gonna talk too much about this, but these are as we switch to distillates and as we switch to newly blended fuel, these are some of the problems that come up. Low flash points, which leads to improper combustion, low lubricity, viscosity, because this causes fuel pump seizures, etc., etc. The key takeaway here is that the ships don't have a refinery on board. The ship's job is to take the fuel, to put it through a process, and that is a fairly straightforward process, whether it's separators or purifiers or any such system, and to clean a particular type of fuel, put it into the engine. For us to get most out of the fuel during slow steaming, we have to be more proactive in order to supply the fuel, the right type of fuel to the ship that is suited to slow steaming. Because otherwise, there is we lead to it's being sort of penny wise and pound foolish. Okay, so sticking with claims, we've spoken a little bit about quality. Let's talk a little bit about quantity. So we are talking about my favorite beverage, cappuccino, which is an issue. It's been in any research that I read, it's been going up. In fact, the interesting thing is that a few years ago, this is before 2008, it was actually recommended air stripping was recommended practice for barges, because that's how they cleaned it. So they used to always pump air through the pipeline when they finished bunkering. But obviously, somewhere along the line when fuel became more expensive, someone discovered that this is a good way to maybe increase the volume of fuel. But there is no we recommend a sort of a back to basics approach over here. A good surveyor, right crew training to be able to spot it, because you can always spot cappuccino. By its very nature, there is froth on top. Proper multi-point sampling. Post bunkering checks during the voyage, so quantity checks by the vessel. We should always encourage the vessel to report the received quantity and not merely sign the BDR quantity, because it is interesting to know. And that's how one catches things like cappuccino. And of course, there is a time bar that one has to respect, because oftentimes the suppliers might say, look, you've got 4 days or 5 days to report any quantity disputes. After that, it becomes too difficult, because the ship's condition has changed, the loading of the ship has changed, and it becomes too difficult to measure what's going on the ship. So just to sort of prove the point, and we're going to poll a question as I talk you through this, and my question is, generally speaking, my bunker quantity claims that are recovered. So we usually recover 100% of claim value. So you are able to recover 100% of what you claim. You generally recover about 50%, or you recover less than 50%. So that's interesting to see. And as you poll in your answers, let me talk you through this slide, which is a BDR. Yeah. So it's a case, and I've had to scrub it obviously because it wasn't taken to litigation. So to cut the long story short, the surveyor found that the ship suddenly had 300 more tons of bunkers than pumped by the barge. Yeah. And the reason was cappuccino. So yes, and this, I don't know if it comes as a surprise, but cappuccino can cause up between 10 and 20% difference in the figures. So it is important, and it can 300 tons. I need not tell you that if there wasn't a surveyor over here, 300 tons is a sizable amount of money. $180,000. So okay, so let's look at the results of what our audience thinks. So 50% of us think that we recover 50%, or no, 60% of us think that it's half and half between the supplier and the buyer, and that's about the norm. A large percentage of us also think that we recover less than that, and they're interesting. We can talk a lot about claims, but the point is that during a claim is a legal process. And as we will see that in a legal process, it becomes things like record keeping and things like what your average buying process is become vitally important. So this is just maybe it reinforces something that we've seen, and again recent headlines, in fact very recent headlines as of Tuesday. Where the incoming chairman of IBEA said that there's a 25% off-spec chance. So in other words, 1 in 4 samples are off-spec on at least one parameter. And in Inatech, which is a surveyor, has said that 1 in 5 submitted samples is off-spec by one parameter. So it's more or less in line with what our audience is thinking around this area, and to us it boils down to really a sort of the fact that this cannot be left to chance. Often price is where most of the energy is spent, and rightfully so. Price is important, and we will talk about it. But quality and quantity and making sure that we get what we delivered is also vitally important. Because if for 60% of us, if 60% of us think that we are not able, that we go 50-50 in claims, well then what happens to that other 50% of the claim that we had to write off? How is that accounted for? So some of the benefits of systemization that we look at, being sort of system providers, is claim bar. First is time bar. So are we able to get all the information together in time to put the case together for the supplier? And are we getting help on this? Because every supplier will have a different time bar depending on the buyer. I've seen for quantity something as less as 3 days, and between 3 and 14 days. And for quality, usually it is longer. It's about 30 days. As the second point I've made is, how does one account for the negotiated claims, the write-offs? So how do we account for the 50% that we had to negotiate off? And I don't mean that we should take that away from the buyer. It's a vital part of the process because the buyer sort of settled the claim. But the fact of the matter is that we need to be able to understand what the impact of that negotiation is, the dollar impact. Quantities, real-time reconciliation from vessels, from surveyors, from barges, and to raise a claim immediately if it is not within tolerance. I mean, we recommend that the tolerance should be as less as 1 ton. Why not? If you've got it automated, why couldn't you keep the tolerance as less as 1 ton? How does one proactively weed out errant suppliers? And this is an important point. Almost all buyers know suppliers. Yeah, we've been buying oil for a long time. But if one says, let's pull out KPIs on suppliers, and I want to be able to rank suppliers on quality, quantity, and price, it usually requires a couple of days spent on Excel. Yeah, and I don't know if this resonates or not, but that's what we find. And what we ask ourselves is, why can't it be delivered on a one-click basis? Because it is a repeatable transaction. Every buyer of any decent-sized company is spending. Again, per vessel we are spending what? Something like 10 million, 12 million per year on bunkers. So you can multiply that. So the point here is that buyers of bunkers, need to be able to produce these statistics because it helps their buying, and should not need to spend time diving into a whole bunch of data sets to produce statistics. Again, sticking on claims, the last point I've mentioned there is about housekeeping. One vessel can have per annum about 150 emails, and these are all manner of emails, from price negotiations to surveyor nominations to order confirmations, the whole lot. And in case of a claim, remember what I said at the beginning, claims is a legal process. So the lawyers are going to ask us for what are the records. And each one of those records can either strengthen our case or weaken our case. So that's why it is important. I mean, and you can, we can do the math. For 50 vessels, it is 7,500 emails. And, for our buyers, our clients, just Outlook and Excel just isn't a good enough answer, because who remembers what happened last year? Okay, so the key takeaway is that claims is a big issue, and I'm glad that our audience thinks the same. So let's move on to prices, and let's see what the impact of these regulations is on prices. So this is a study that says what will be the switch to marine distillates. So we mean gas oil or diesel as an impact of forthcoming regulations. So across the black circle over there is looking at next year and saying that there will be about a 40 to 50% jump in gas oil or the low sulfur product, which whatever it is. Is it diesel or is it a dirty gas oil, whatever the product is. And depending on when the global regulations come in 2020 or 2025, compared to today, we're going to be looking at almost a 1.5 times jump, 160%. And the point I wanted to make, which I'm glad is being sort of echoed in our audience, is that prices will go up, but more importantly, volatility will go up. And let's sort of home into that point and try and look at it. So what I've done there, again, recent Bunker World stats, and what I've done there is I've plotted the Rotterdam prices for the past 3 months across the 3 products, which is IFO 380, low sulfur 380 1%, and low sulfur MGO 1%. And the candlesticks there is the volatility. So the point there is very simple. The volatility in products that are in the market is low, and the volatility for newer products is higher. And that, of course, that is looking at one port. So in other words, and volatility is again, it depends on the buying as well, because that's why we have a high-low price. Looking at mean, that's what mean is. Mean is an average. And everyone can say, look, we are okay against average. But how are we doing against the lower prices? Because there is a range in there. So this is volatility within one port. And just to sort of share some data, it's about $20 to $30 for the established products. And for the new product, the red line over there, it's about $60 to $100. So that means 2 buyers going to the same market for the same product can experience a range of between $60 to $100 per ton, and that's interesting. So let's look at volatility across ports. Again, it's a busy slide, but I offer no apologies for it, because this is where it becomes interesting. So what I've done here is, again, I've looked at prices from December 10th to March 10th, so past 3 months. I've looked at the Rotterdam-Singapore differential for the 3 products, which is IFO 380 MGO and low sulfur MGO 0.1%. So, and this is the differential between Rotterdam and Singapore prices. So essentially, you take the Rotterdam price and you subtract the Singapore price from it. The average is for IFO 380 is minus $31. I hope you can read that. That's the only number that I'm wanting to highlight. The average for gas oil, regardless of the absolute price of gas oil, the differential between Rotterdam and Singapore is minus $34. And the differential for the low sulfur MGO 0.1% is minus $64, double that. And you ask yourself, why is that? Because how does one create low sulfur MGO? One mixes the 2 products, one blends the 2 products. and one creates. So you know, there is an interesting, and we can spend a lot of time on it. I'm trying not to sort of get into too much detail, but the key takeaway here is that it provides arbitrage possibilities for suppliers and for buyers, and the trick here is to recognize the volatility and to try and take advantage of it, and not be sort of captive from it. So let's move forward. So again, looking at what's going to happen, and this is the last slide on prices. Looking at what's going to happen with prices, I've plotted the high sulfur fuel oil, which is the brown line, the 0.1% gas oil, which is the green line, and the 0.5% sulfur, which will be the global product. And where we are, the point we're trying to make here is that the majority of the product that is being used today is the high sulfur product, and there's an average price of that. The product that we will use as of 2025 will be a low sulfur product, 0.5%, and I'm assuming that it will be 2025. If it's earlier, then you know it will be 2020. And the differential will be 530 tons. So in other words, what we're saying is that the price of bunker oil will likely double. And this is regular bunker oil, not looking at products. The price of the fuel that the ship burns is going to double. And I've taken you know, a more safe approach, because I am hoping that we are able to shift the deadline to 2025. But if it is 2020, then it will be in the next 5 years. Yeah. And you know, I can spend a whole webinar on this, because there's a lot of factors. You know, we can talk about LNG, we can talk about scrubber shift, we can talk about a whole bunch of things. But you know, and my point here is not to sort of try and predict the prices for yourselves. That is certainly not my price, because a prediction is just that. It is a prediction, and I could be wrong. The point I'm trying to make is that, and using nautical parlance, it's more important than to predict the wind is to know how to adjust the sails. And this comes back to the first question we asked, which is the buyer empowered with the tools and processes to buy better? Okay, so that's what we've seen thus far. And you know, we've been talking a lot about what's going on in the market. And this is, you know, I've borrowed this term from technology. If this, then that. It's actually a coding command that developers use that connects two algorithms together. If this, then that. And my point here is, if what I've said holds true, then what does a buyer do? How do we respond to it? So essentially, the procurement options, you know, and then again, you know, we can spend a whole webinar on this. The point is that the buyer has options of going into the spot market, market-based contracts, term contracts, fixed forward pricing, and we're going to look at the two marked in bold and try and mention the elements that a sound bunker procurement strategy should have. So over here, what we have is, in our research, the top factors influencing fuel procurement. So the top factors influencing fuel procurement are planning, timing, and negotiation. The key takeaway here is, look how far down volume is. And this is true. So large volume is a factor, and this is averaging, but it's by no means the only factor, and by no means the top three factor that determines the absolute price which a buyer pays. This is how the oil market is. So let's look at the top three factors a bit in detail. For us, you know, Planning begins in the last bunkering port. Is the buyer able to create a plan that is, even in spot trade, that is region-wise, that one can alter depending on the commercial flying of the voyage. We need to, of course, identify the next voyage and positioning. For some segments, this is easier done. Containers, is easier done than spot, but even within spot, one can have a region-wise strategy. Determine the bunkering options on voyage and trade range. What support are systems giving you to determine what's in your range? How does one do diversion calculations? How does one get support of the sort of current topic is the Russian diversion? How does one incorporate that into one's commercial voyage? Of course, one has to consider voyage constraints, determine the grade for compliance. Compliance, as we said, is going to become more and more important. Look at bunker tank capacities and segregations. We spoke about contamination of fuel, and then one needs to select bunker location. So these planning steps, again, I'm by no means saying that you definitely need tools and processes for this, but processes give consistency, and consistency delivers gains, and that is true of any function that one does. Timing, again, to the question what affects the timing of a purchase, the answer, the right answer is what doesn't. I think everything affects the timing as when you decide to enter the market. But I've listed down some of those figures, some of those factors. Inventories, availability, moving averages. One needs to consider those. Brent crude, what is crude doing? Is often an indicator, although not all the time. I mean, recently we've seen strange things. Brent crude has been going up for the past week, whereas prices have been softening in most of the, fuel oil, so residual fuel oil prices have been softening. Tanker freight, good indicator, of the demand and supply. Forward curve and Forex for the more sophisticated analysis. What we always try and suggest is, look, even for spot trade, endeavor to avoid spot requirements, and this is a very, very important and very interesting discussion, because often bunker buyers feel captive of the commercial, and they say, look, I don't even know where the port is, where the vessel is going. How can I go and choose the best price? No one's asking us to get a best price. One is asking us to have a scenario plan, because trade is moved for centuries, and although every company thinks that they will be able to find well-paying cargo in a very strange location, chances are it will be more or less in the same region. And in the time of slow steaming, no one can tell me that the vessel must be there on the 13th of March and not 2 days later, unless there's a premium to be paid. But if there's a premium paid, then anyway, the buyer can go and procure a higher price. So, of course, one needs to be flexible to changing market conditions, but one cannot be held captive of the commercials, because that relationship was true when the commercials were strong for the shipping industry, and for the past few years they've not been. Negotiation, again, I don't need to tell the audience, this is what you negotiate is what you get, but negotiation cannot be a sort of a binary function. So give me a good price or I will go to another supplier. I don't believe that is a strong enough incentive for suppliers to offer good prices. Suppliers like to offer good prices to buyers who know what they're doing. And maybe that's a bold statement, but this is a supplier-driven market, and and we need to be careful of that. Okay, so I'm gonna, as we're running short of time, I'm gonna try and speed up a little. I'm sorry, we're probably gonna run 5 minutes over. The point is over here is have a good coverage as your, if you're going into the spot market. Firstly, as I said, have a strategy for the spot market. Secondly, have a good coverage. Each of these parties brings something to the table. The thing is, does our system, the system allow for a broad coverage to tap into the individual strengths of these buyers? So, with all that, hopefully, you get an idea of what the components should be. Again, it is not important that we should be able to, tell what the price is tomorrow. It is important that we should be ready to adjust our sales should the winds change, and the winds are changing very frequently. Within ShipTech, which is the system our clients use, this is our core philosophy. Procure the highest quality fuel for the lowest possible price, utilizing intelligence, decision support, and optimization. So a turnkey solution will be embedded into the environment, the IT environment of the shipping company or the buying company. So the system obviously embeds itself because this system is meant for bunker procurement and does that only. So we make sure that it talks to the accounting system, to the vessel voyage management system, and helps improve the overall profitability of the company. This is, I'm just sharing with you a planning dashboard that we have. Across the left there, you've got all the ports. Across the top there, you've got the calendar. And the buttons are telling us the requests as they come in from the vessels and how they sit in different categories. Remember what I said, planning is the most important function. So buyers are able to straight away familiarize themselves and focus on, so in this case, the red dots are pending. That means they're pending, some action needs to be taken on this. And of course, for large fleets, this is important because the longer I have for planning, the better buying I can do. We spoke about supplier KPIs. These are some graphs, and without getting into detail, essentially we are rating suppliers on the basis of quality, quantity, and price, and not only just absolute price, but also things like final price on top of initial price. There, delivered quantity on ordered quantity there, quality on quality pass over number of stems there, claims at the bottom over there. And we don't look at this as historic analysis. These KPIs relate to a particular score, and that score is delivered to the buyers when they purchase. So in other words, if I have a supplier ranking happening in the background, every time I go inside the system and I say I want to buy, let's take, and I'm thinking of port, let's take Abidjan or Conakry or one of the ports which are less familiar. I should be able to go in and be able to see what the supplier ranking is on the basis of my history. So in other words, we start doing business with better suppliers. And the buyers often only have a couple of hours, if that, to send requests. So speed is important. If we had all the time in the world, of course, anyone would be able to do this on Excel. And what we find is that on average, a systemized approach and a process and tools-driven approach delivers 2% saving. So some simulations there, depending, of course, they depend on the fuel consumption of the vessel, but these are per annum savings that our customers have enjoyed deploying a systemized approach to bunkering. So this is the presentation. Again, we're running slightly over, but I'd be happy to take questions. if you've got any questions or comments, we're opening the floor now. And we can start. If you have any, do keep them coming in. So I'll take the first question first, which is how can procurement strategy help manage issues with fuel quantity and quality? Depends on what you think procurement is. I think procurement is having a price in mind, going into the market with a price, buying the product, and then getting what I want. To me, that is procurement. Procurement is the end-to-end process. We measure procurement on things like number of claims, because anyone can get a great price if the supplier knows that he can deliver your vessel. He can short deliver your vessel by 200 tons. They will give you a good price up front. It is the buyers control the environment. The suppliers control the environment. The ship is far away. The buyer is sitting in a centralized location. So my point is that a procurement strategy should cover all parts of procurement and not just getting a good price. Okay, the second question is how to manage volatility of prices. So the volatility of prices is typically controlled by, we recommend two approaches. One approach is a buyer beware type approach. So you try and get a good coverage of the market. You make sure that you are relating to the right benchmarks. So which benchmarks is one using? Is it Platts? If it's within Platts, it's bunker wire, or is it another product that might be closer to your need? Depends on how you're measuring it, and depends on your risk policy. Then one can talk about forward prices. One can talk about fixed forward prices, and often suppliers are able to deliver that. If you want to have that discussion, you can lock a price. Yeah. So going on. So the next question is, I'm trying to read it as I go. Which reference can be used for evaluating stems done? Example, Bunker World, Platts, or perhaps another source. So use as many. There is, again, I go back to my shipping days, and those of us who are seafarers amongst us or sailors amongst us know that we triangulate a vessel's position. By triangulation, what I mean is we have different sources. So no one source is 100% accurate. But a triangulation of sources, not only looking at mean, but also looking at highs and lows, helps you understand the market better and over time develop a decent strategy. And, we can have a good discussion. So, we'll be sharing our emails. So if you've got more questions on the follow-up, please do email us. We are now closing the webinar, but as I said, before we close, I hope you found this webinar informative. And I guess the key takeaway from here is that buyers need to be more engaged in the buying environment, and not lose interest only once the deal is done, because all the post-purchase activity is becoming more and more important. Management is becoming more and more interested in bunkers, and it's coming under a lot more scrutiny. But the question is, do we have the right tools and processes in place? So on this note, I'd like to close the webinar. We thank you for your participation. Please do send us the questions via email. We'd like each of you to remain a few moments longer, complete a short evaluation. In a moment, you'll get 2 multiple choice questions. Do answer them. It helps us get the budget from our bosses to keep doing these webinars. So the first question is, how do you rate our webinar? And the second question is, you've achieved what you expected to achieve from this webinar, so thanks very much for that. So finally, that brings us to the end. Thank you for your responses and for attending the webinar. It's been a pleasure for us, and I hope you continue to attend Inatech webinars. And of course, if you have any questions and comments, do email them to us. Thanks once again, and have a great day ahead. Goodbye.